I always thought the scariest part of driving cross-country at night was falling asleep at the wheel. I was wrong. The real nightmare started the moment I picked her up, a stranger who somehow knew my name and my ex's. It's been almost 3 years since that drive, but I still avoid that stretch of Highway 93. I used to laugh at ghost stories. I thought they were just fuel for YouTube horror channels or cheap campfire thrills. But after what I saw that night, I don't laugh anymore. I was driving from Arizona to Oregon, trying to start over after a rough breakup. My ex, Lena, and I had been together for almost 5 years. She cheated, I left, and I didn't look back. I packed everything I owned into my old silver Toyota and hit the road. I didn't have a plan. Just the hum of the engine, a few energy drinks, and a GPS that barely worked in the middle of nowhere. It was close to midnight when I entered a long, empty stretch of desert highway. The road signs had stopped miles ago. There wasn't a single light in sight except for my headlights cutting through the dark. The radio signal had died hours earlier. So I drove in silence, listening to the faint rattle of the dashboard and the sound of gravel crunching beneath my tires. I remember glancing at the clock, 12:37 a.m., when I saw her. A lone figure on the shoulder, her thumb out, standing next to a broken-down sedan with its hazards blinking faintly in the dark. At first, I hesitated. Every instinct said don't stop. But something about the way she stood there, completely still, her head tilted slightly toward my car, made me slow down. When I rolled down the passenger window, I saw her face for the first time. She was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a long dark coat and jeans. Her hair was soaked like she'd been standing in the rain, except it hadn't rained for days. Her voice was soft but distant when she asked, "Can you give me a ride? My phone died. I just need to get a few miles down the road." I hesitated, glancing at the empty desert around us. "Yes, sure," I said finally. "Hop in." She opened the door slowly and sat down without another word. The smell hit me instantly, not bad, but strange, like old perfume mixed with damp earth. We drove in silence for a few minutes. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Trying to make small talk, I asked, "So, where are you headed?" "North," she said quietly. "Same as you." That made me pause. "How do you know where I'm headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smiled faintly, still looking out the windshield. "You told Lena you were going to Oregon, remember?" My hands froze on the steering wheel. I hadn't said my ex's name aloud in days. I glanced at her. She was still smiling, just barely, like she was remembering something private. I forced a nervous laugh. "Wait, do we know each other?" She turned her head slowly toward me. "Not yet," she said. "But I know you, Daniel." The sound of my own name coming from her lips sent a chill through me. I swear I hadn't told her my name either. For the next few miles I kept quiet. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and the silence inside the car grew heavier. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. No gas stations, no exits, no signs. Just the hum of the tires and that faint, sweet, rotting smell coming from her coat. Every few seconds, I caught her glancing at me through the reflection in the windshield. Not turning her head, just watching me from the corner of her eye. At 1:14 a.m., my dashboard lights flickered. The engine gave a weak cough, and the headlights dimmed for just a second. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper coming from the backseat. It sounded like someone quietly saying my name, right behind my ear. I looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. When I looked at her again, she was smiling. "You shouldn't look back, Daniel," she whispered. "That's where the dead ride." My heart was racing now. I gripped the steering wheel and pressed harder on the gas, trying to get off that road. I remember my voice shaking when I asked, "What the hell do you mean by that?" She didn't answer. She just turned toward me fully. Her eyes were darker now, like the pupils had swallowed the color. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You left her crying in that old kitchen, didn't you? The night you drove away. My mouth went dry. That was exactly how I'd left Lena, crying in the kitchen, barefoot, begging me not to go. How do you know that? I demanded. She smiled wider. Because I was there. And just like that, she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door was still closed. No sound. No movement. But the smell, that perfume and wet dirt, still lingered. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I got out, scanning the road with my flashlight. Nothing. Just miles of empty highway and the whisper of desert wind. I didn't know what else to do, so I drove until I found a gas station around 2 a.m. The place was half-lit, with one flickering neon sign that said open. The cashier, an older man with gray stubble, looked up as I walked in, pale, shaking, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. He asked if I was okay. I told him everything. The woman, the perfume, how she vanished. When I mentioned the road, his face changed. He didn't look surprised, more like he'd heard this before. He nodded slowly and said, "Son, you've been driving the devil's stretch. Folks around here don't take Highway 93 after midnight. Not since the accident." "What accident?" I asked. He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, a woman and her boyfriend were driving that road. They'd been fighting, real bad. He pulled over, told her to get out. She chased after the car, but he didn't stop. By morning, a trucker found her dead on the side of the road. The man disappeared. Never found. My throat tightened. "What was her name?" I asked quietly. He squinted, thinking. "Lena something. You know her?" I couldn't move. My ex's name echoed in my head. "Lena." I stammered. "But she's alive. I talked to her last year." He just shook his head slowly. "Maybe you talked to someone, but not her. They buried that girl just down the road." I stumbled outside, gasping for air. My car was still running, headlights casting long, shaky shadows on the pavement. And then, I smelled it again. That faint, damp perfume. I turned and saw something on the passenger seat. A small, folded note. My hands trembled as I opened it. It said, "I never made it home, Daniel." A chill ran down my spine. I looked up, and in the reflection of the car window, for a split second, I swear I saw her sitting beside me again. Smiling. Watching. The next blink, she was gone. I drove straight through till sunrise. I didn't stop, and I've never taken that road again. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and I smell that same faint perfume, I glance at the passenger mirror, just to make sure the seat's still empty. Because I know one day, she's going to want the rest of that ride. If you ever find yourself driving through Nevada past midnight, and see a glowing rest stop in the middle of nowhere, don't stop. I learned that the hard way. My name's Ryan. This happened 3 years ago, when I was driving cross-country with my two best friends, Luke and Mason. We were headed from California to Colorado, taking the long route through the desert because Luke swore the drive would be peaceful. It was around 2:30 in the morning when it happened. The highway had gone completely dark. No towns, no cars, just that constant hum of the tires against the road and the desert stretching endlessly on both sides. We hadn't seen a single gas station or rest stop for hours. Mason was asleep in the back seat, snoring lightly, and Luke was half dozing beside me. The radio had turned into nothing but static, and even the GPS started to flicker in and out. That's when I saw it. A glowing sign appeared ahead on the right, "Rest stop 1 mile." I almost didn't believe it. The letters looked a bit faded, but it felt like a miracle. I woke Mason, saying we'd finally found a place to stretch and grab something to eat. We turned off the highway and followed a narrow road. The light ahead grew brighter until we reached a small, old-fashioned rest stop. There was a bathroom building, a row of vending machines, and a little convenience store with buzzing fluorescent lights. It looked normal at first, but something about it felt off. For one thing, the parking lot was full of dust, like no one had driven through for years. The vending machines had logos I didn't recognize, brands that looked like they belonged in the 80s. Pepsi had its old blue and red wave design, and one of the snack machines had a faded sticker for Hostess Twinkies and new recipe. Luke joked about it. "Damn man, feels like we time traveled." But his voice sounded uneasy. Inside the store, the air smelled stale, like plastic and old carpet. The cashier stood behind the counter, motionless. A middle-aged man wearing a faded red vest with a name tag that just said Earl. When I said hi, he didn't respond. He just watched us. Mason grabbed a soda from the fridge, but the moment he twisted the cap, it hissed and sprayed everywhere, flat and sour. He spat it out immediately. "This thing's expired," he said, frowning. Luke picked up a candy bar and noticed it, too. The wrapper looked decades old, like something from a museum. I started to feel this weird tightness in my chest. The store felt too quiet. Even the humming of the lights seemed muffled. Then, the radio behind the counter crackled to life. A man's voice spoke through it. "Breaking news. President Reagan has declared." I froze. "Reagan?" Luke laughed nervously. "This must be some retro station or something." But when I looked closer, the radio wasn't plugged in. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my neck. I turned back to Earl. His eyes were wide open, but his expression hadn't changed. He just said in this flat, dry voice, "Road's been long, huh? You boys passing through?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just headed east." He smiled slightly. It didn't reach his eyes. "Be careful on that road. People get lost." Then, before I could respond, every light in the building flickered once. Just once, but long enough to plunge us into total darkness for half a second. When they came back on, Mason whispered, "The guys? Where's Earl?" He was gone. There were no doors behind the counter, no sound of footsteps, just empty space. We left everything and rushed outside. The wind had picked up, and the desert air felt colder. Luke was swearing under his breath. Mason wanted to get back on the road immediately, but as I turned the car around and pulled toward the exit ramp, my headlights caught something in the distance. Another sign. Rest stop 1 mile. At first, I thought it was just the highway loop curving around. But when I turned right, the road curved, and within minutes, we were back at the same rest stop. Same dust, same flickering lights, same old vending machines. I stopped the car, breathing heavily. No way. We just came this way. Luke checked his phone, no signal. Mason tried the GPS again, but it kept buffering on the same frozen screen. We tried again, and again. Every route we took, left, right, even reversing and finding new paths, every single time, the road looped us right back to that same glowing rest stop. The third time, I noticed something different. The vending machines were empty. Completely empty. The glass was cracked, and the inside was dark. The lights inside the convenience store flickered, and for a split second, I saw a figure in the window, not Earl this time. It was taller, almost too tall, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. Then the lights went out again. Luke whispered, "We need to go. Now." We sped off, not caring which direction we were going anymore. The desert stretched endlessly around us. No other cars, no signs, no stars. Just black sky and that fading yellow glow of the rest stop behind us. After what felt like 20 minutes of driving, the car's dashboard clock blinked and reset to 12 o'clock. All the electronics went dead. The GPS, the radio, even the headlights flickered. Then I heard something. A faint rustling sound from the back seat. Mason sat up, confused. "What's that?" We all turned. The soda bottle Mason had opened earlier, the one that had sprayed everywhere, was sitting upright again on the seat beside him. But the label was gone. Completely blank. Then, slowly, condensation started to form on the outside of the bottle, even though the car was warm. It wasn't water. It looked like fingerprints. Small, damp fingerprints pressing against the inside of the plastic. I slammed on the brakes. Mason threw the bottle out the window, and it hit the ground with a hollow thud. No splash. Just empty sound. We sat there in silence for almost a full minute. Then Luke said something I'll never forget. "Look behind us." Far down the road, maybe half a mile away, was the faint glow of that rest stop again. The lights, the building, exactly the same. Only this time, the sign was different. Instead of "Rest Stop 1 mile," it just said, "Come back." We kept driving. We didn't stop again until the sun came up, and when it finally did, the GPS came back online. We were on a completely different highway, miles away from where the map said the rest stop should have been. There was nothing marked there at all. Just open desert. When we reached the next Real gas station, I asked the cashier if there was an old rest stop about 50 miles west. He looked confused. "No man. Ain't been a rest stop out that way since the 70s. Burned down years ago. Whole family died inside." I remember feeling my stomach drop. Luke and Mason both looked pale, like they'd seen a ghost. The man pointed toward a wall near the register, where a bunch of old newspaper clippings were pinned. One headline read, "Tragedy at Desert Rest Stop. Fire claims lives of family and clerk." Below that was a black and white photo. I leaned in closer, and nearly dropped the paper. The clerk in the photo, the one named Earl, was the same man we saw that night. Same red vest, same face. Only difference was, in the photo, his eyes were completely black from the burn marks. We never spoke about it after that. Luke refuses to drive at night now. Mason moved to the East Coast and hasn't been on a road trip since. As for me, I still drive sometimes, but every time I pass a rest stop, I glance at the vending machines, just to make sure they're stocked, modern, real. Because if I ever see those old, faded logos again, I'm not stopping. Not ever again. I used to love late-night drives through the mountains. It was peaceful, quiet, until the night I realized we weren't alone in the car. This happened about 5 years ago in Colorado. I was driving home with my wife and our 8-year-old daughter after spending the weekend at my brother's cabin near Estes Park. It was early fall, and the air was already cold enough that fog clung to the trees and the winding mountain roads. We'd left a little later than planned, around 10 p.m., because my daughter didn't want to leave. It was about a 2-hour drive back to Denver, and I figured we'd be home by midnight if the road stayed clear. The highway was empty, not a single car in sight. Just the sound of our tires on the road and the occasional whoosh of wind through the trees. We were all tired, and for the first hour or so, everything was normal. Then we stopped for gas. It was one of those small-town stations you see on back roads. A single pump, a flickering light, no other cars around. I remember it because the place gave me this weird feeling like we shouldn't have stopped there at all. My wife went inside to grab coffee, and I stayed out to fill the tank while my daughter slept in the back seat. At some point, I thought I heard a noise, like a car door creaking open behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just darkness and the trees. I brushed it off, got back in the car, and we continued driving. About 15 minutes later, my daughter, who had been half asleep in the back, mumbled, "Daddy, who's talking?" I thought she was dreaming. I said, "Nobody's talking, honey. Go back to sleep." But then my wife turned to me and said quietly, "Do you hear that?" And I did. It was faint, like whispers, coming from the back seat. It sounded like two voices, soft and broken, like someone trying to have a conversation through fabric. I glanced in the rearview mirror. My daughter was sitting up now, wide awake, staring at the empty seat beside her. "Daddy," she said, "there's someone back here." I felt my stomach drop. I turned the radio off to make sure it wasn't interference. The whispers didn't stop. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. Just the sound of the road and those quiet, breathy murmurs. Then my daughter whispered, almost crying, "I saw them. In the window." "What do you mean you saw them?" I asked. She pointed at the backseat window. "In the reflection," she said. "They were whispering." Now, I know how kids can imagine things in the dark, but the way she said it, she wasn't imagining. She was terrified. My wife turned around to check, and I'll never forget the look on her face. She froze, staring at the door. Then she said, "The back door's locked from the inside." That didn't make sense. The child lock was on. The doors couldn't be locked manually from back there. I pulled over on the side of the road, a narrow shoulder with just enough room for the car. The woods on both sides were pitch black, not even a streetlight in sight. "Stay here," I told my wife. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. The air was so still it almost hurt to breathe. I walked around to the back passenger door and pulled on the handle. Locked. I leaned closer, trying to see inside. That's when I noticed it, a faint handprint on the inside of the window. It wasn't clear like a greasy smudge. It looked wet, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass recently. I tried the handle again, harder this time. Still locked. My wife rolled the window down just enough to ask, "What is it?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain what I was seeing. I got back in the driver's seat and locked the doors again. For the next few miles, we drove in silence. Nobody said a word. But then the whispers came back. This time, they weren't faint. They were closer, right behind our seats. I could make out bits of what sounded like a man's voice. And another, softer, almost like a woman crying. Then I heard it, clear as day, through the static of the radio that had suddenly flicked on by itself. A man's voice whispered, "Don't stop." My wife screamed, "Did you hear that?" Before I could say anything, our daughter started crying. "Daddy, they're back there." I slammed the brakes and spun around. The back seat was empty. But the air inside the car had changed. It felt heavier, like the oxygen had been sucked out. My skin was crawling. I turned back toward the road, and that's when I saw something in the rearview mirror. Two dark shapes standing behind the car, in the middle of the lane. They weren't moving, just standing there in the fog. I flicked on the high beams, and in that second they vanished. Gone. I floored it. My wife was sobbing. My daughter had her hands over her ears. The whispers didn't stop, though. They followed us. Every few seconds I'd hear a breath or a faint sh, like they were moving closer each time we turned a corner. I swear at one point I felt cold air brush the back of my neck, from inside the car. And then nothing. Silence. For a full 5 minutes there was no sound at all. Not the radio, not the whispers, not even the wind outside. When we finally reached a bigger town, I pulled into a brightly lit 24-hour gas station. I told my wife to take our daughter inside and wait. I opened the back door myself. Nothing. But the handprint was still there, smaller now, like it had been fading. And there was this strange smell, damp, almost moldy, like old wet clothes that had been sealed away too long. A man working at the station walked over and asked if we were okay. I asked him to check the door. He tried the handle, frowned, and said, "This lock's jammed, looks like someone messed with it from the inside." When he finally got it open, something fell onto the floor mat, a small folded piece of paper, wrinkled and dirty. He handed it to me. I opened it under the station lights. There were 3 words written in shaky handwriting. "We never left." We didn't say a word on the drive home. My daughter cried herself to sleep in my wife's arms. I stayed up that whole night, sitting in the living room, just listening. Every now and then, I swore I could hear faint static, the same sound the radio made before those whispers started. A few days later, I took the car to a mechanic to replace the backdoor panel. When he called me to pick it up, his voice was uneasy. He said, "Sir, I don't know what you've got going on with that car, but when we opened the back panel, there were old scraps of clothing stuffed inside. Wet, moldy, like they'd been there for years." I sold the car that same week, and I haven't driven a mountain road at night since. But sometimes, when it's really quiet, when the house is dark and I'm the only one awake, I still hear that faint whisper behind me, just low enough that I can't tell if it's real. And every single time, before I get in my car, I check the backseat,